a projected top 10 pick, 41 touchdowns, a 70% completion rate, the son of one of football's greatest legends. And yet, when draft night ended, Shedeur Sanders sat in stunned silence as 32 names were called before his. Not in round 1, not in round 2, not even in round 3 or 4. Pick 144, the 5th round. That's where the Colorado quarterback finally heard his name, selected by the Cleveland Browns, a franchise his own father had publicly criticized. For months, analysts blamed arm strength concerns. They pointed to footwork issues. They whispered about his father's meddling. But then a Hall of Famer went on radio and said something that changed everything. According to his NFL source, the league itself told teams not to draft Shedeur Sanders. They wanted to make an example of him. Now the Browns are in complete chaos. Their head coach is gone. Their franchise quarterback situation is a disaster. And the most powerful man in professional football, Roger Goodell, has gone completely silent about allegations that could shake the foundation of how the NFL operates. This is the story they don't want you to know. And it starts with 4 words spoken months before the draft. Before the controversy, before the draft night disaster, before the conspiracy theories took hold, there was just a kid from Texas proving he belonged among the best quarterbacks in college football. Shedeur Sanders arrived at Colorado with expectations that would crush most players. His father had just taken over a struggling program, and critics were waiting for the entire experiment to fail spectacularly. Instead, Shedeur delivered. His junior season at Colorado was nothing short of remarkable, over 4,100 yards through the air, 41 touchdowns against just 9 interceptions, a completion percentage hovering around 70%, elite by any standard. He wasn't just managing games or riding his father's coattails. He was legitimately one of the best quarterbacks in the country, making throws that had NFL scouts drooling. The numbers told only part of the story. What separated Shedeur from other prospects was his poise under pressure. Fourth-quarter comebacks became routine. 2-minute drills looked effortless. When defenses loaded up to stop him, he picked them apart with surgical precision. When they gave him time, he made them pay with deep shots that hit receivers in stride. Draft analysts started taking notice early in the season. Some projections had him going as high as the top 5. Others placed him solidly in the top 10. The floor, most agreed, was somewhere in the first round. A quarterback with his stats, his pedigree, his experience in big moments didn't fall past pick 32. That just didn't happen. But Shedeur brought something else to the table that made him even more valuable in the modern NFL. Star power. The kid understood branding in ways that most college athletes never grasp. His personal brand, legendary, wasn't just a slogan. It was a lifestyle, a mentality, a movement. He had millions of followers across social media platforms. Every game at Colorado felt like a national event because of the attention he and his father commanded. NFL teams love marketable quarterbacks. They sell jerseys. They fill stadiums. They generate buzz that translates into television ratings and sponsorship deals. Shedeur checked every box. He had the talent, the charisma, the name recognition, and the clutch gene that separates good quarterbacks from great ones. Comparisons to his father were inevitable, though perhaps unfair. Deion Sanders played a completely different position and brought a different skill set to the game. But both possessed that same undeniable confidence, that swagger that made opponents uncomfortable and teammates believe anything was possible. The pre-draft process seemed to confirm what everyone already knew. Shedeur performed well at the combine. His interviews went smoothly. Teams expressed legitimate interest. Multiple franchises brought him in for private workouts. The Cleveland Browns, desperate for a quarterback after the Deshaun Watson disaster, were among those reportedly very interested. Everything pointed toward Shedeur hearing his name called early on draft night. The talent was there. The production was there. The intangibles were there. Scouts and analysts debated whether he'd go before or after Cam Ward, the Miami quarterback, but almost nobody questioned whether he'd be a first-round pick. His confidence never wavered during the process. This was a young man who had grown up around greatness, who had watched his father dominate at the highest level, who had been preparing for this moment his entire life. He knew he belonged. He believed he was ready. The mock drafts kept his name in the top 15. Some had him going to the Giants. Others projected Tennessee or Las Vegas. Cleveland made sense for obvious reasons. The Browns needed a franchise quarterback desperately, and Shedeur needed a team willing to build around his talents. On paper, everything aligned perfectly. A talented quarterback, teams in need, a draft class that had clear separation between the top prospects and the rest. Shedeur Sanders should have been celebrating on draft night, holding up a jersey, posing for pictures with Roger Goodell. But somewhere between those glowing scouting reports and that April evening in Green Bay, something changed. Something that would send one of college football's brightest stars tumbling down draft boards in ways that defied all conventional logic. February 7th, 2025. New Orleans hosted the NFL Honors Ceremony, where the league celebrates its best players and biggest moments from the previous season. The red carpet was packed with current stars, legends, and future prospects hoping to make their mark. Among those future prospects was Shedeur Sanders, looking every bit the part of a soon-to-be NFL quarterback. Cameras followed him throughout the evening, capturing handshakes and conversations with various league figures. One of those interactions would later become the subject of intense scrutiny. Roger Goodell, the NFL commissioner, approached Shedeur for what appeared to be a routine meet and greet. They shook hands. Smiles were exchanged. It looked cordial, professional, exactly what you'd expect between the most powerful man in football and a top prospect about to enter his league. Then the conversation took an unexpected turn. Shedeur made a request that seemed innocent enough at the time. He asked Goodell to let his brother Bucky have his way in the league. Bucky had been covering Shedeur and his Colorado teammates as a content creator, and the family wanted that arrangement to continue at the professional level. Goodell's response stopped everything cold. 4 words that would echo through the months ahead with increasing significance. The commissioner looked at this young quarterback and said plainly, "I'm worried about your dad." Shedeur appeared caught off guard. He asked what Goodell meant by that statement. The video that captured this exchange cuts off before any further explanation is offered. Whatever the commissioner said next, if he said anything at all, remains unknown to the public. At the time, most people dismissed the interaction as insignificant. Goodell expressing concern about Deion Sanders wasn't exactly breaking news. Coach Prime had been making waves in college football, drawing attention both positive and negative with his unconventional approach. Maybe the commissioner was simply acknowledging the media circus that followed the Sanders family everywhere. But hindsight changes everything. Looking back at that moment now, knowing what happened on draft night, those 4 words take on an entirely different meaning. Was Goodell genuinely expressing concern about a former player turned coach, or was he issuing a warning about what was coming? The commissioner's choice of words matters here. He didn't say he was impressed by Deion. He didn't wish Shedeur luck. He didn't offer the typical pleasantries that happen at these events. He specifically used the word worried. That's a loaded term coming from someone with Goodell's power and influence. Some have speculated that Goodell was referencing Deion's public comments about controlling where his son would play in the NFL. Weeks before the honors ceremony, Coach Prime had made it clear that certain teams were off limits. He mentioned he would intervene if Shedeur ended up in the wrong situation. That kind of talk doesn't sit well with NFL owners who believe they control the draft process entirely. Others believe Goodell was concerned about the media attention and potential chaos that drafting a Sanders would bring to any franchise. The constant cameras, the social media presence, the father potentially second, guessing every coaching decision. For some organizations, that baggage might outweigh the talent. There's also the possibility that Goodell already knew something. Perhaps discussions had already taken place among owners about how to handle the Sanders situation. Perhaps the decision to send a message had already been made, and the commissioner was dropping a subtle hint about what awaited Shedeur in April. The truth is, only Roger Goodell knows what he meant by those words. He hasn't addressed them publicly since that night. He hasn't explained why he chose to express worry about a father when speaking to a son who was months away from realizing his NFL dreams. Shedeur left that interaction and continued preparing for the biggest moment of his career. He trained harder. He studied more film. He did everything prospects are supposed to do in the months leading up to the draft. He had no way of knowing that the commissioner's cryptic comment might have been the first sign of trouble ahead. Less than 3 months later, those words would take on a whole new meaning, and Shedeur Sanders would experience a draft night that nobody, including himself, could have predicted. April 24, 2025. Green Bay, Wisconsin hosted the NFL draft, and Shedeur Sanders was ready for his moment. He had set up an elaborate watch party in Canton, Texas, about an hour east of Dallas. The room was decorated with his personal brand, Legendary, displayed prominently throughout. The most telling detail of his setup was a shelf containing hats from 20 different NFL teams: Titans, Browns, Giants, Patriots, Jaguars, Raiders, Jets, Saints, Bears, 49ers, Cowboys, Dolphins, Colts, Falcons, Cardinals, Steelers, Bills, Chargers, Packers, Vikings, 20 franchises he believed might call his name. He was prepared for almost any scenario. Hours before the first pick, Shedeur posted on social media with characteristic confidence, "I'm built for whatever today may bring." That Sanders swagger was on full display. He genuinely believed he was about to become a first-round NFL quarterback, joining elite company and validating years of hard work. The draft began, and Commissioner Goodell stepped to the podium to announce the first selection. The Tennessee Titans were on the clock. They selected Cam Ward, the Miami quarterback who had trained alongside Shedeur during the pre-draft process. No surprise there. Ward was considered the top quarterback in the class by most analysts. Pick number 2 brought more expected news. The Jacksonville Jaguars, who had traded up aggressively, selected Travis Hunter. This was Shedeur's own teammate at Colorado, the Heisman Trophy winner who played both offense and defense. 2 picks in, and the Colorado connection was already strong at the top of the draft. Then the waiting began. Pick after pick, Goodell announced names that weren't Shedeur Sanders. Teams that needed quarterbacks passed. Franchises that had expressed interest went in different directions. The first round rolled on, and that shelf of 20 hats started looking optimistic rather than practical. Pick 25 delivered another gut punch. The New York Giants, who had traded back into the first round, selected Jackson Dart from Mississippi, another quarterback taken before Shedeur. At this point, the cameras at his draft party captured what words couldn't, the confusion spreading across his face, the realization that something was going terribly wrong. 32 picks. 32 names called by the commissioner. Shedeur Sanders wasn't among them. The first round ended, and the quarterback who many believed was a lock for the top 15 sat in Canton, Texas, trying to process what had just happened. When the broadcast finally cut away from his party, Shedeur addressed everyone who had gathered to celebrate with him. His message was defiant. "This is fuel to the fire." But those words couldn't mask the underlying emotions. Confusion, betrayal, anger at a process that had seemingly betrayed every expectation. The football world scrambled for explanations. Analysts who had projected him in the first round suddenly discovered concerns about his arm strength. Teams leaked anonymous quotes about his father being too involved. The narrative shifted from future star to too much baggage in a matter of hours. But none of it added up for people paying close attention. Quarterbacks with worse stats and less production went ahead of him. Players with legitimate injury concerns heard their names before his. The fall wasn't just unexpected. It was unprecedented for a prospect with his credentials. Shedeur barely slept that night, knowing day 2 would bring more uncertainty. He returned to his party set up the following morning, still hoping to hear his name called early in the second round. Surely, teams would recognize the value he represented. Surely, someone would take a chance on a talented quarterback who had simply slipped through the cracks. The second round came and went. Then the third. Then the fourth. Each pick that passed without his name felt like another small humiliation broadcast to the entire country. His father, Dayan, was notably quiet throughout the process. The man who always had something to say, who commanded every room he entered, watched his son endure public embarrassment while offering little public commentary. Day 2 of the draft ended with Shedeur Sanders still waiting, still wondering, still trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. The Cleveland Browns entered the 2025 draft desperately needing a quarterback. Everyone knew it. Their situation with Deshaun Watson had become a complete disaster. Injuries, off-field issues, and a fully guaranteed contract worth $230 million had turned the franchise into a cautionary tale. When round 2 began with Cleveland holding pick 33, the football world assumed Shedeur Sanders would finally get his call. The Browns needed what he offered. He was still sitting there, available at a fraction of his projected draft position. This seemed like the obvious match. The Browns passed. They selected a different player entirely, leaving analysts confused and Shedeur still waiting at his draft party. Maybe they wanted to address another position first. Maybe they had plans to grab him later. Whatever the reasoning, the most logical landing spot had just bypassed the most logical choice. Round 3 brought even more confusion. Cleveland was picking again, and this time they did select a quarterback. But it wasn't Shedeur Sanders. The Browns took Dillon Gabriel from Oregon, a player most evaluators considered less talented than the Colorado signal caller still available. Think about what that decision communicated. The Browns were so desperate for quarterback help that they used a third-round pick on the position. Yet they deliberately chose someone rated lower than Shedeur, who remained on the board. Either Cleveland had concerns about Sanders that nobody else understood, or something else was influencing their decisions. Round 4 passed without any action from Cleveland regarding Shedeur. At this point, his draft party had grown quiet. The cameras that had captured his early optimism now showed a different scene entirely. Family and friends trying to offer support while watching a nightmare unfold in real time. Finally, in round 5, the Browns made their move. They traded back into the draft specifically to select Shedeur Sanders with pick 144. The quarterback projected as a top 10 talent, the player who threw 41 touchdowns in his final college season, heard his name called in the 5th round. General manager Andrew Barry would later describe the selection in revealing terms. He said the Browns got Shedeur at a steep discount. That phrase tells you everything about how Cleveland viewed the situation. They saw a talented player whose value had cratered and took advantage of the opportunity. But why had his value cratered so dramatically? Teams pass on players for various reasons. Injury concerns, character questions, scheme fit issues. None of those explanations made sense for Shedeur. He was healthy. His character had never been seriously questioned. His skill set fit multiple offensive systems. The only explanation that kept circulating involved his father. Deion Sanders had been vocal about wanting control over his son's NFL destination. He had publicly criticized certain organizations. He had made it clear that some situations were unacceptable. Perhaps teams simply didn't want that headache, but even that explanation felt incomplete. Plenty of prospects come with complicated family situations. Plenty of players have outspoken parents who generate controversy. That alone doesn't cause a 50-pick slide from first-round projection to 5th-round reality. Cleveland's decision to draft Dillon Gabriel before Shedeur made even less sense under scrutiny. If the concern was truly about Deion's influence, why not avoid the situation entirely? Why take Gabriel in round 3 and then come back for Sanders in round 5? The sequence of events suggested indecision, confusion, or pressure from outside sources. After the draft, Barry defended the Gabriel selection by praising his experience and leadership. He carefully avoided any direct comparison to Shedeur or explanation for why the Browns preferred one over the other initially. The answers reporters wanted never came. What nobody outside the organization knew at the time was that Cleveland's decision might not have been entirely their own. According to sources that would emerge months later, the Browns faced pressure from multiple directions regarding the Sanders situation. Their draft room might have been less about evaluation and more about politics. Shedeur arrived in Cleveland facing an uphill battle from day one. He was the 5th-round pick on a team that had just drafted another quarterback ahead of him. His path to playing time looked nearly impossible. And the franchise that selected him had done so in the most confusing, convoluted manner imaginable. 3 months passed after the draft. Shedeur Sanders quietly reported to Cleveland's training camp, far from the spotlight that typically follows top quarterback prospects. The story of his dramatic fall had faded from headlines, replaced by training camp battles and preseason speculation. Then Eric Dickerson changed everything. The Hall of Fame running back appeared on a Los Angeles sports radio program called The Raj Mahal and Rodney Show. What he said during that interview sent shockwaves through the football world and gave new life to conspiracy theories that many had dismissed. Dickerson claimed he had received information from someone inside the NFL, not a random source with questionable credibility. According to him, this was someone who would know exactly what happened behind closed doors during the draft process. The allegation was explosive. Dickerson stated that the NFL told teams not to draft Shedeur Sanders. The league wanted to make an example of him and his family. They wanted to send a message that nobody, regardless of their celebrity or influence, could dictate terms to the NFL establishment. But Dickerson didn't stop there. He added another layer to the conspiracy that made it even more troubling. According to his source, someone placed a call to the Cleveland Browns during the draft and pressured them to select Shedeur. Without that intervention, the Browns weren't going to take him either. He might have gone undrafted entirely. Let those allegations sink in for a moment. A Hall of Famer was claiming that the league office coordinated a blackball against a 22-year-old quarterback. That the commissioner or someone in his orbit told franchises to avoid a specific player regardless of his talent. That only outside intervention prevented Shedeur from experiencing complete humiliation. Dickerson refused to name his source. He emphasized multiple times that this person had legitimate inside access. He insisted the information was credible enough for him to stake his reputation on publicly sharing it. The implications of these allegations are staggering if true. Draft interference at the league level would violate everything the NFL claims to stand for. The draft is supposed to be a meritocracy where talented players get selected based on their ability to help teams win. If the commissioner's office can secretly pressure franchises to avoid certain players, that foundation crumbles entirely. Consider what teams might have passed on. The Tennessee Titans took Cam Ward first overall, which made sense. But what about teams picking in the teens and 20s? Did they have Shedeur rated highly on their boards only to receive mysterious guidance suggesting they look elsewhere? How many front offices wanted to select him but got subtle warnings about the consequences? The NFL never formally responded to Dickerson's allegations. No statement was issued denying the claims. No investigation was announced. Roger Goodell never addressed the controversy directly. The league's strategy appeared to be ignoring the story entirely and hoping it would fade away. For many observers, that silence spoke volumes. The NFL typically responds aggressively to allegations that threaten its integrity. They launch investigations. They issue denials. They threaten legal action against people spreading false information. The complete lack of response to Dickerson's claims struck people as unusual. Shedeur Sanders himself never publicly addressed the allegations. His father remained uncharacteristically quiet as well. Perhaps they recognized that engaging with the story would only amplify it. Perhaps they were advised to focus on football and let the controversy run its course. But the questions Dickerson raised never fully went away. Every time Shedeur took the field in Cleveland, people wondered whether he was playing for a team that had been forced to draft him. Every time his name appeared in headlines, the conspiracy theories resurfaced. The most troubling aspect might be what we'll never know. Dickerson's source remains anonymous. The phone call that allegedly pressured Cleveland has never been confirmed. We have allegations from a credible football figure, but we lack the documentation that would prove or disprove his claims definitively. What we do know is that something unusual happened on draft night. Shedeur Sanders fell further than any prospect with his credentials reasonably should have. And the only explanation that makes sense of that fall involves forces beyond football evaluation. To understand why the league might orchestrate something this dramatic against a 22-year-old quarterback, you have to understand the man they were really targeting. Shedeur Sanders wasn't threatening anybody. His father was an entirely different story. Deion Sanders isn't just a Hall of Fame player from another era. He's Coach Prime, one of the most polarizing figures in all of sports. When he took over the Colorado football program, he didn't just change the team. He changed the entire conversation around college athletics. The attention Coach Prime commands is unprecedented for a college coach. His press conferences draw national coverage. His recruiting visits become major media events. His opinions on everything from player compensation to transfer portal rules generate endless debate. He operates on a different level than his peers, and that makes certain people very uncomfortable. What makes Deion especially threatening to the NFL establishment is his willingness to challenge conventional authority. He doesn't follow unwritten rules about staying in your lane. He speaks his mind regardless of who might be listening. He built a brand that rivals any active player or coach in professional football. In January 2025, months before the draft, Deion made comments that reportedly infuriated NFL owners and executives. He stated publicly that he would intervene if Shedeur ended up with the wrong team. He mentioned specific organizations he considered unacceptable destinations for his son. One of those organizations was the Cleveland Browns, the very team that would eventually draft Shedeur in the 5th round after the alleged blackball failed. The irony of that outcome has fueled conspiracy theories ever since. Think about what Deion was claiming. He was saying that his influence and leverage would allow him to override the draft process itself. If Shedeur got picked by a team Coach Prime didn't approve of, there would be consequences. Maybe Shedeur wouldn't sign. Maybe he'd demand a trade. Maybe the entire situation would become a media circus that damaged the franchise. That kind of talk doesn't sit well with NFL owners who collectively believe they run the most powerful sports league on earth. They don't like being told what they can and cannot do. They especially don't like someone outside their circle wielding influence that rivals their own. Roger Goodell works for those owners. His job is protecting their interests and maintaining order within the league structure. If Shedeur Sanders successfully controlled where his son played, it would set a dangerous precedent. Other families might try similar tactics. The draft could become a negotiation rather than a selection process. From this perspective, making an example of Shedeur makes strategic sense. By tanking his draft stock, the league demonstrated that the Sanders family doesn't get special treatment. By forcing him to Cleveland, specifically a team Shedeur had criticized, they rubbed salt in the wound. By burying him on the depth chart behind multiple quarterbacks, they ensured he wouldn't become an immediate success story. The message was clear. You don't threaten the NFL. You don't try to control outcomes that owners believe they control. And if you attempt to exercise leverage that challenges the established hierarchy, there will be consequences for your family. Some have compared this situation to how other leagues have dealt with outspoken figures. Commissioners across professional sports have demonstrated willingness to use their power against individuals who threaten institutional authority. The methods are usually subtle, difficult to prove, and devastating in their effectiveness. What makes Shedeur's situation unique is his platform. He can fight back in ways that other targets cannot. His media presence gives him a megaphone that reaches millions. His celebrity status means any conflict with the league becomes a major national story. Perhaps that's why Goodell and the owners chose to target Shedeur instead of Shedeur directly. Going after the Suns sent the message without creating a direct confrontation with Coach Prime. It was punishment by proxy, damaging the person Shedeur cares about most while maintaining deniability about any coordinated effort. The cruelest aspect of this entire situation might be what it did to Shedeur personally. He became collateral damage in a power struggle he didn't create. His draft stock suffered because of his father's words and actions, not his own performance or character. If the NFL's goal was breaking Shedeur Sanders, they underestimated his resilience. The young quarterback arrived in Cleveland facing obstacles that would have defeated most prospects. Instead of crumbling, he adapted in ways that surprised everyone watching. The Browns' quarterback room was crowded and complicated when Shedeur joined the team. Joe Flacco, the veteran with Super Bowl experience, sat atop the depth chart. Kenny Pickett, the former first-round pick, served as his backup. Dillon Gabriel, the third-round selection Cleveland made before Shedeur, occupied the third spot. That left Shedeur as the fourth-string quarterback. The guy who threw 41 touchdowns in college couldn't even dress for games initially. He was a practice squad player in everything but official designation. The humiliation from draft night continued into his professional career. Most players in this position would have demanded a trade. They would have complained publicly about their situation. They would have had family members calling out the organization on social media. That's exactly what the NFL expected from a Sanders. Shedeur did none of those things. He showed up early for meetings. He stayed late after practice. He studied film like his career depended on it, which it absolutely did. He kept his mouth shut and let his work speak for itself. His father remained surprisingly quiet as well. Coach Prime, never one to avoid controversy, refrained from criticizing Cleveland's handling of his son. Perhaps both Sanders men recognized that causing problems would only justify the concerns teams had cited during the draft process. The season progressed, and Cleveland's quarterback situation deteriorated. Watson's injury issues continued. Flacco showed his age. Pickett struggled when given opportunities. Gabriel, despite being drafted higher, failed to separate himself from the pack. By late November, the Browns had no choice but to turn to Shedeur. They gave him his first NFL start with 7 games remaining in the season. It wasn't a vote of confidence. It was a desperate franchise running out of options. His debut wasn't pretty. The statistics reflected a quarterback adjusting to a speed and complexity he hadn't experienced in college. He completed just over 59% of his passes. The touchdowns came slowly. The interceptions piled up faster than anyone wanted. But something was different about how Shedeur handled adversity at this level. He didn't pout on the sidelines after mistakes. He didn't blame teammates for drops or missed assignments. He took responsibility in press conferences while working to fix problems behind the scenes. The Browns went 3-4 in those 7 starts. Not a winning record, but not embarrassing either for a 5th-round rookie with limited preparation time. More importantly, the final 2 games offered glimpses of what Shedeur could become. Against Pittsburgh, a division rival with a strong defense, Shedeur led Cleveland to an upset victory. His decision-making improved. His timing with receivers sharpened. He made throws that reminded people why he was once considered a first-round talent. The following week against Cincinnati, he did it again. Another win. Another step forward in his development. The quarterback who had been written off before ever taking an NFL snap was suddenly looking like a legitimate prospect again. Teammates noticed the transformation happening in front of them. Shedeur earned respect through his approach to the game. He didn't demand anything based on his family name. He worked for every ounce of credibility he accumulated. The Browns' offensive coordinator, Tommy Rees, offered measured praise while acknowledging how much development remained. He talked about learning quarterbacks over years, not weeks. He emphasized patience while noting the progress that had occurred. For Shedeur, that progress represented something larger than football statistics. He had survived the worst possible entry into the NFL. He had handled public humiliation with grace. He had answered questions about his father's influence by demonstrating his own individual resilience. None of this guaranteed future success. Plenty of quarterbacks show flashes before fading into obscurity. The NFL remains unforgiving to young players who can't sustain improvement. Shedeur's journey was just beginning, and the challenges ahead looked as daunting as the ones behind him. But he was still standing, still fighting, still believing in himself when so many others had stopped believing in him. Just when Shedeur Sanders appeared to be finding his footing, the organization around him collapsed completely. January 6, 2026, the Cleveland Browns announced they were firing head coach Kevin Stefanski. The move sent shockwaves through the league and added another layer of uncertainty to Shedeur's already complicated situation. Stefanski had been a respected coach, someone who had won Coach of the Year honors in the past. His dismissal signaled that ownership wanted wholesale changes, not minor adjustments. The Browns were entering full rebuild mode, and nobody knew what that meant for the quarterbacks on the roster. General Manager Andrew Barry survived the purge, which struck many observers as interesting. He was the architect of the decisions that had put Cleveland in this position. He had signed Watson to that disastrous contract. He had made the confusing quarterback selections during the draft, yet he kept his job while the coach got fired. Barry addressed the media shortly after the Stefanski firing, and his comments about the quarterback situation created more questions than answers. He acknowledged seeing progress from Shedeur during the season. He mentioned the mental and physical development that had occurred. He noted the playmaking ability and accuracy that had emerged in those final games. Then came the qualifier that sent uncertainty rippling through Cleveland. Barry stated plainly that the organization would explore the quarterback market. He couldn't confirm whether the starter in 2026 would come from inside or outside the building. For a quarterback who had just won his final 2 games and shown legitimate improvement, those words had to sting. Shedeur had done everything asked of him. He had waited his turn. He had performed when given the chance. And the general manager still couldn't commit to him as even part of the plan moving forward. The Watson situation loomed over every conversation about Cleveland's future. That $230 million, fully guaranteed contract remained one of the worst deals in NFL history. Cutting Watson would cost the Browns over $80 million in dead cap space for the current year alone, with more damage spreading into future seasons. The likely solution involved restructuring Watson's deal to lower the immediate cap hit to around $40 million. That would keep him on the roster while providing some financial flexibility. But it also meant Watson would remain in the building, creating an awkward dynamic with whoever emerged as the starting quarterback. Cleveland held significant draft capital heading into the offseason. Their own pick at 6th overall would give them access to the top tier of prospects. The Jacksonville Jaguars' first-round selection, acquired in an earlier trade, provided additional ammunition. If the Browns wanted to reset the quarterback position entirely, they had the resources to attempt it. The problem was the draft class itself. Analysts considered the 2026 quarterback group significantly weaker than the previous year's crop. Dante Moore, one of the top prospects, announced he was returning to Oregon for another college season, removing himself from consideration entirely. That left Fernando Mendoza as the clear best quarterback available. But Mendoza was projected to go in the top 3 or 4 picks, meaning Cleveland would likely need to trade up substantially to land him. Using that 6th overall selection on a quarterback seemed unlikely given the talent drop-off after Mendoza. The math started working in Shedeur's favor almost by accident. The better prospects weren't available. The draft class was thin. Watson's contract made adding another expensive quarterback complicated. By process of elimination, giving Shedeur a real opportunity in year 2 began looking like the most sensible option. That's not how any player wants to earn his chance. Shedeur deserved consideration based on his performance, not because other options had evaporated. But the NFL rarely operates based on what's fair. It operates based on what's practical for franchises trying to win games. The coaching search would determine much of what happened next. Whoever Cleveland hired would inherit this mess and have significant input on the quarterback decision. Some candidates might see Shedeur as a project worth developing. Others might want their own guy from the draft or free agency. Everything remained in flux as the offseason began. The only certainty was uncertainty itself. Through all of this chaos, one figure has remained conspicuously absent from the conversation. Roger Goodell, the most powerful man in professional football, has said absolutely nothing about the allegations surrounding Shedeur Sanders and the 2025 draft. Think about what that silence means. A Hall of Fame player publicly accused the league of coordinating a blackball against a draft prospect. That allegation directly implicates the commissioner's office in manipulating one of the most sacred processes in professional sports. And Goodell's response has been complete, total, unwavering silence. The NFL typically protects its image aggressively. When allegations threaten the league's integrity, they usually respond with statements, investigations, and legal actions. They don't simply ignore serious accusations and hope they disappear. Yet that's exactly what's happened with the Sanders situation. Some might argue that responding would give the conspiracy theories more oxygen. By ignoring Dickerson's claims, the league allows the story to fade from public consciousness. Most casual fans have already forgotten about the allegations. The news cycle moves on to other controversies, but silence carries its own implications. When the most powerful figure in a sport refuses to address direct accusations of corruption, observers draw their own conclusions. The lack of denial reads as confirmation to those already suspicious of league motives. Sources inside the NFL suggest that the league office is watching Cleveland's situation very carefully. They're monitoring how the Browns handle Shedeur going forward. They're paying attention to how he responds to continued uncertainty. They're observing whether Deion Sanders remains quiet or begins speaking out about his son's treatment. If the league really did orchestrate the draft fall, they need a specific outcome from this situation. They need Shedeur to either fail spectacularly or fall completely in line with NFL expectations. Either result would validate their alleged actions. A failed Shedeur Sanders becomes proof that the concerns were justified. Teams can point to his struggles and claim they were smart to pass on him. The narrative shifts from conspiracy to correct evaluation. The Sanders family gets humbled, and the league maintains its authority. A compliant Shedeur Sanders sends a different but equally powerful message. It demonstrates that even the most connected families must bend to NFL power structures. The kid learned his lesson. His father learned his lesson. Nobody challenges the establishment and wins. What the league cannot afford is a successful Shedeur Sanders who speaks openly about how he was treated. A quarterback who becomes a star in Cleveland while discussing the obstacles placed in his path would undermine everything they allegedly tried to accomplish. That's the scenario that should concern Goodell most. Those final 2 wins against Pittsburgh and Cincinnati showed real potential. The improvement Shedeur demonstrated down the stretch suggests he might actually develop into a quality NFL starter. If that happens, the narrative changes completely. Suddenly, the story becomes about a talented young man who overcame coordinated opposition from the most powerful league in sports. It becomes about institutional overreach and abuse of power. It becomes exactly the kind of scandal that damages the NFL's carefully cultivated image. Perhaps that's why the commissioner remains silent. Speaking about the situation in any capacity brings attention to allegations he'd rather forget. Denying the claims creates a he said situation with a Hall of Famer. Confirming anything would be catastrophic. So Goodell watches and waits. He monitors Cleveland's decisions from his office in New York. He keeps tabs on the Sanders family's public statements. He hopes the whole controversy fades into history, while Shedeur either washes out of the league or becomes just another quarterback nobody remembers. The problem with that strategy is that Shedeur keeps giving people reasons to remember him. Every time he makes a play, the story resurfaces. Every time someone discusses Cleveland's quarterback situation, the conspiracy theories get mentioned. The silence that Goodell hopes will kill the story might actually be extending its lifespan. What the commissioner thinks now is anyone's guess. What he'll do if Shedeur succeeds remains unknown. What accountability, if any, will ever come from these allegations is impossible to predict. The Shedeur Sanders who entered the 2025 draft is not the same person navigating the 2026 offseason. Adversity has a way of changing people, and the transformation in this young quarterback has been remarkable to witness. Before the draft, Shedeur carried himself with undeniable swagger. That confidence bordered on arrogance at times, exactly what you'd expect from someone who grew up around Shedeur Sanders. He believed he was special. He expected the world to recognize that specialness. The concept of humility seemed foreign to his personality. Draft night shattered those assumptions. Watching 32 picks go by without hearing his name forced a reckoning. The fifth-round selection confirmed that his self-image didn't match how the league viewed him. Something had to change if he wanted to survive. His responses to reporters now reflect that evolution. When asked if he'd done enough to prove he should start in 2026, he gave an answer that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. He said he couldn't think about other people's opinions or how they viewed him. He acknowledged he couldn't control someone else's decisions. That's maturity speaking. That's a young man who learned the hard way that talent alone doesn't guarantee anything in professional sports. He discovered that perception matters, politics matter, and keeping your mouth shut sometimes matters most of all. His comments about the upcoming season showed similar growth. He stated plainly that nothing was promised going into year 2. He emphasized staying in the moment and focusing on what he needed to do just to remain on the roster. No demands for a starting job. No complaints about his treatment. No threats about what might happen if things didn't go his way. Compare that to how his father handled things in January 2025. Dayan was talking about intervening in the draft process, about refusing certain destinations, about exercising leverage that no college player's parent should realistically have. Shedeur has adopted the opposite approach entirely. He's been building his brand quietly during the offseason. New partnerships with companies that align with his image, training videos that show his dedication to improvement, social media presence that focuses on work rather than complaints. Everything he does publicly reinforces the message that he's learned his lesson. When asked to characterize his rookie season, Shedeur called it a learning year. Not disappointing, not frustrating, not unfair despite the circumstances that brought him to Cleveland. A learning year. That framing tells you everything about how he's choosing to process the experience. The people around him have noticed the change. Teammates describe a different person than the one who arrived at training camp. Coaches praise his work ethic and coachability. Even front office personnel who were skeptical initially have warmed to his approach. Perhaps the most significant development is what hasn't happened. His father has remained uncharacteristically quiet about Shedeur's situation. No press conferences criticizing the Browns. No social media posts questioning coaching decisions. No behind-the-scenes drama leaking to reporters. Either Dayan learned his own lesson from how the draft unfolded, or Shedeur asked him to step back and let him handle his own career. Whatever the reason, the absence of Coach Prime's voice from this situation has made Shedeur's path forward considerably smoother. The NFL wanted to make an example of the Sanders family. They wanted to demonstrate that celebrity and confidence don't override league authority. In a twisted way, they succeeded. Shedeur is playing the game exactly as the establishment wants him to. But that success might ultimately backfire on those who orchestrated it. By forcing Shedeur to adapt, they may have created a more complete and dangerous quarterback. The raw talent was always there. Now he has the mental framework to maximize it. The cocky kid who expected everything handed to him has been replaced by a hungry professional willing to earn every opportunity. That transformation doesn't happen without the adversity he experienced. Ironically, the league's alleged attempts to humble him might have been exactly what his development required. Whether that evolution translates to on-field success remains the central question. Shedeur has proven he can handle the mental challenges of the NFL. Now he needs to prove he can consistently win games. The 2026 season approaches with Cleveland's quarterback situation still unresolved. Every path forward carries significant complications, and the decisions made in the coming months will determine whether Shedeur Sanders gets his legitimate opportunity. The head coaching search represents the most immediate uncertainty. Whoever accepts the Cleveland job will have enormous influence over the quarterback room. Some candidates might view Shedeur as a project worth developing. Others might prefer importing their own solution through the draft or free agency. The new coach will inherit a roster that needs work everywhere. The defense requires upgrades. The offensive line needs reinforcements. The skill positions could use more playmakers. Quarterback is just one of many problems demanding attention. Watson's contract remains the elephant in every room. The likely restructure will keep him on the roster while providing cap flexibility. That means the new coach must navigate having a former franchise quarterback making significant money while developing younger alternatives. It's an awkward situation with no clean resolution. The draft capital Cleveland possesses gives them options. That 6th overall pick could address numerous positions of need. The Jacksonville selection adds another first-round player to a rebuilding roster. Using either pick on a quarterback seems less likely given the class weakness, but nothing is impossible. Athletic reporter Zach Jackson indicated that early signs point toward Shedeur competing for the starting job next season. Watson will probably remain on the roster. Another quarterback might arrive through the middle rounds. The competition will be genuine rather than predetermined. That scenario represents Shedeur's best realistic outcome. He won't be handed anything. He'll need to beat out Watson and potentially another newcomer for the right to start. But at least he'll have the chance to prove himself through performance rather than politics. Browns fans approach the situation with cautious optimism. They've endured decades of quarterback disasters. They've seen promising young players fail to develop. They've watched the franchise make baffling decisions repeatedly. Hope doesn't come easily to Cleveland supporters, but something about Shedeur's journey resonates with this fan base. The city understands being overlooked and underestimated. The franchise knows what it's like to be dismissed by the football establishment. There's a connection between this quarterback and this market that transcends typical player-team relationships. The statistics from his rookie season require context to evaluate fairly. 1,400 yards and 7 touchdowns don't jump off the page. Neither does the 59% completion rate or the 10 interceptions. But he was playing behind a patchwork offensive line with limited weapons in an offense designed for someone else. Those final 2 wins matter more than the aggregate numbers. Against playoff-caliber competition, Shedeur showed he could deliver when it counted. The Pittsburgh and Cincinnati games revealed a quarterback capable of handling pressure, making crucial throws, and leading his team to victory. Year 2 will determine whether that late-season surge was a mirage or a preview. Quarterbacks typically make their biggest developmental jumps between their first and second seasons. The game slows down. The playbook becomes second nature. Confidence built through experience allows natural talent to emerge. If Shedeur makes that jump, everything changes. The narrative shifts from conspiracy to redemption. The Browns potentially find their franchise quarterback through the most unlikely path imaginable. The Sanders family gets the last laugh against those who tried to keep them down. But if he struggles, the doubters will feel vindicated. The concerns about his arm strength will seem justified. The fall to pick 144 will look like 31 teams making correct evaluations. The story ends with disappointment rather than triumph. Nobody knows which outcome awaits. Not Roger Goodell, not Andrew Barry, not even Shedeur himself. Professional football remains unpredictable despite everyone's best efforts to control it. What we do know is that this story isn't finished. The young quarterback from Colorado still has chapters to write. The franchise that drafted him under mysterious circumstances still has decisions to make. The commissioner who allegedly orchestrated everything still has questions he refuses to answer. 2026 will provide clarity on at least some of these mysteries. Until then, Shedeur Sanders remains one of the most fascinating figures in professional sports. The Shedeur Sanders saga represents something larger than one quarterback's draft position. It exposes questions about power structures within the NFL that rarely receive public attention. It reveals how the league allegedly operates when someone challenges established authority. It demonstrates what happens when a family's brand becomes threatening to those who control professional football. Roger Goodell set out to send a message to the Sanders family. He may have succeeded in ways he never anticipated. The quarterback who arrived in Cleveland humiliated has emerged as someone more mature, more resilient, and potentially more dangerous than the one who fell on draft night. The next 12 months will determine whether this story ends in vindication or validation. Either Shedeur proves the conspiracy theorists right by succeeding despite coordinated opposition, or he fades into obscurity and becomes a cautionary tale about family interference in professional sports. What cannot be disputed is that something unprecedented occurred during the 2025 draft. A first-round talent fell to the fifth round for reasons that defy conventional evaluation. Someone allegedly made calls that influenced franchise decisions. And the most powerful commissioner in sports has refused to address any of it. The truth is still waiting to be told, and Shedeur Sanders is still waiting for his chance to tell it.